You probably already know this, but your vote for president doesn't count in America. I mean, it does, just not how you think. We've got this thing called the Electoral College, a system that a lot of people find confusing and even a bit unfair. It's probably the biggest reason you don't see more progressive change. Instead of directly voting for the president, we're technically voting for a group of people called electors. These electors are the ones who officially vote for president, and every state has a certain number of them, which is based on the House of Representatives, which is based on the state population plus two senators from each state. It's confusing, I know. The senators vote based on the majority vote of their state, but the representative casts their vote based on their district. So for example, if you're somehow still keeping up with this, California is a large state, has a lot of big population, and so it has 54 electoral votes. 52 of those are from the representatives plus the two senators, so that makes the 54. Wyoming, much smaller in population, has only 3 electoral votes. The two senators, and you guessed it, that's right, the entire state of Wyoming only has 1 congressional representative. And fun fact, it used to be Liz Cheney, daughter of Dick Cheney, enemy of Donald Trump, and coster of Kamala Harris's campaign. So how do states decide electoral votes? Well, in most states, it's winner take all. This means if you win the popular vote in that state, you win all that state's electoral votes. So if a candidate wins by just 1 vote in Florida, they get all 30 of Florida's electoral votes. This is kind of a major flaw, which has big influences on elections. Al Gore, the Democratic nominee in 2000 election, lost to George Bush because of about 450 people in Florida who voted for Bush over Gore. And that gave Bush all 30 electoral votes. It pushed him over the 270 he needed to win, and voila, our new president. Even though 500,000 more people voted for Gore versus Bush out of the entire United States, it was the 450 people in Florida, of all places, that spoke for the nation. Now, some exceptions to this weird electoral college winner takes all rule is Maine and Nebraska. All those states have the winner take all system, but Maine and Nebraska, they follow an entirely different rule. Instead, they divide their electoral votes by district, and each congressional district awards 1 electoral vote to its winner, and the remaining 2 go to the statewide popular vote winner. So why do we have the Electoral College? Back in 1787, the founding fathers were divided. Some wanted Congress to pick the president because they didn't trust people to make an educated decision. And honestly, not a bad take. Over 70% of Americans would fail a basic civics quiz. So I don't know if we really want them, like, picking the president and all that. But others thought democracy, direct vote. Because, yeah, democracy. So these fucking colonizing geniuses made the Electoral College, a little mix of both. Their compromise was to give both states and citizens a role in elections. And the reasons for this compromise? Well, the Electoral College was designed to balance power between larger and smaller states, ensuring that less populated states still had a say. They worried that with direct voting, it might lead to hasty decisions based on popular sentiment. By adding this layer, they aim to create stability. That's the name of the game here. So, what are the pros of the Electoral College? Number 1, protecting smaller states. Supporters say Electoral College forces candidates to consider the needs of smaller states. And without it, they argue, candidates would only focus on large cities and ignore rural areas. And that makes a lot of sense. More than half of Americans live in big cities. So if we were trying to win a popular vote, you'd be where the popular kids are. This new system makes politicians care about small towns like Wyoming and their values and way of life, which is, I guess, a good thing. Nice for them. The Electoral College pushes candidates to build coalitions across different regions, instead of focusing on just a few populous areas, preventing nationwide recount. Another pro is that in close elections, recounts can be limited to specific states instead of having to do nationwide recounts. This helps avoid long delays in getting election results. This part addresses more so the ways of working by having this split by district ballot counting, because it becomes decentralized and thus harder to flub, or even worse, to fraud. And we know how much we hate election fraud. But what are the cons of the Electoral College? Well, I'll tell you, unequal representation. One key criticism is that not all votes carry the same weight. Smaller states get proportionally more influence than larger states. Let me explain. So, if you think again about that California and Wyoming example, yes, most people live in California, but 54 electoral votes might not actually be enough. How? Well, Wyoming is a smaller state and has about 580,000 people in total. I know, crazy. And gets 3 electoral votes. That means each electoral vote in Wyoming represents around 193,000 people. Now take California with 39 million people living in the state and 54 electoral votes. If you do the little division here, carry the one, borrow the zero, that represents about 722,000 people per 1 electoral vote. So if you're a voter in Wyoming, your vote has about 4 times the power in the Electoral College compared to a voter in California. This means that a vote in a smaller state like Wyoming has a much bigger impact on the election outcome than a vote in a bigger state like California. Don't understand what I mean? Just look at the 2000 election Florida example again. We're giving way too much power to a few group of people that, I might add, are not typically the most diverse in culture or experience or enriching resources. Isn't this still what the founding fathers feared with a popular vote? I mean, again, in 2000, Florida decided the nation's president and probably changed the course of Western civilization forever. I want you to Google Florida man and tell me if any of those people seem like they should have a deciding vote. Unfair, I know. But another con is swing state focus. It didn't just happen in 2000. Every election, as this country gets more and more partisan, only a handful of states really get the attention and decide the election. Candidates focus on swing states like Florida, Pennsylvania, while states that consistently vote one way or another are often ignored. This increases the partisanship and thus cultural divide between states and puts the swing states in an anxious identity crisis. Am I Republican? Am I Democrat? Where their views and perspective are weighted much too heavy against the larger national population. Yeah, who's living in rural Pennsylvania or Ohio? Anyway, the biggest con, which we've been circling around this whole time, is the popular vote versus the Electoral College. A candidate has won the presidency without winning the popular vote only 5 times, and every time it was a Republican leader. Twice in the last 25 years, with Bush in 2000 and Trump in 2016. And do I even have to talk about how those terms went? So we got the flaws, how do we fix it? Well, like everything in politics, it's complicated. It's strange how politicians never want to admit that things are complicated and that there's no perfect answer. Like they like to pretend that they've got all the answers. But the answer here is that it's complicated. Recent polls show about 60% of Americans now favor moving to a popular vote. Young voters in particular show strong support for the change, probably because they've lived to see 2 bad leaders that weren't elected by the majority of America. A direct popular vote would mean that the candidate with the most votes wins across the country. However, it could shift campaign focuses to primarily big cities and big cities alone. Now, we can do a national popular vote interstate compact. So what do? Well, there is one thing. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. This agreement would have states pledge their electoral votes to the National Popular Vote winner, but only if states join to reach 270 electoral votes. Some people suggest that we could make all states follow Maine and Nebraska's lead and split their electoral votes based on districts, or proportionally by vote. So if 60% of a state's votes for candidate A and 40% for candidate B, the electoral votes would be divided to reflect that. This could be a compromise that makes the system more balanced without scrapping the whole thing. In conclusion, the next step for change. How do we change the system? Educate and advocate. The first step is to keep learning about the Electoral College and why it matters. Because like I said, with everything in politics, it's complicated. More complicated than even the information I gave here. I didn't mention how many districts there are, who actually represents them, and how we can gain or even lose districts. It's a lot, but it's worth it. The more people understand how the system works and doesn't work, the stronger our ability to affect change. States have a lot of power over their own election rules, as we've seen with Maine and Nebraska. Not gonna lie, America's pretty cool like that. Look into what your state is doing, support candidates who are open to reforming the Electoral College, and push for your state to join the National Popular Vote Compact. Reforms like these don't happen overnight. They need people to care and vote and push for changes over time. Share what you know, vote for leaders who are ready to consider these changes, and keep the conversation going. So, what's your take? Should we stick with the Electoral College? Do you want to go to a direct popular vote? Or should we find some middle ground? Let me know in the comments how you'd fix it and if you think things should stay as it is. The more we talk about it, the closer we get to a system that reflects what Americans really want.